Welcome to our online attendees and welcome also to the standing room only crowd here in Emerson Hall on the Cornell University campus. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Emeritus Professor Mike Hoffman. In addition to his faculty role in Cornell's Department of Entomology for more than 3 decades, Mike held multiple leadership roles in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, including Executive Director of the Cornell Institute for Climate Change Solutions, Director of the Cornell University Experiment Station, Associate Dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and Associate Director of Cornell Cooperative Extension. And finally, a program that he's very well known for across New York State, the New York State agriculture community, Director of the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program. Mike Hoffman's on a mission to help people understand climate change through the foods we eat. Sharing a science-based but broadly accessible message, Mike seeks to tell the story far beyond an academic audience like we have assembled here in Emerson Hall today. As Mike says, we all eat, making this story relevant to everyone every day. He's published climate change articles in the popular press, such as The Hill, Fortune, Medium. I had to check to see if this was really a popular press. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, Daily News in USA Today. And he's lead author of a book published by Cornell University Press and released in 2021 entitled Our Changing Menu, Climate Change, and the Foods We Love and Need. He also was a TED Talk speaker, Climate Change, It's Time to Raise Our Voices, that was very well received. And he's given over 150 talks related to climate change. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mike Hoffman.
Thank you very much. Whoa, there's a crowd here. I'm getting nervous. How's everybody doing? Good. By the way, I can't move this arm. Normally I'm swinging around, but I have a constraint, so I'll just be using this arm. I like to start, can I move around? Sure. I like to start these talks with a simple question. In one word, describe your future given climate change. Poor. Anybody else? Optimistic. Just yell it out. It's a friendly crowd. Hot. Change. Unpredictable. One more. Challenging. I also hear overwhelming, frightened, desperate, stuck. Can't do anything. Thank you. Well, I hope to give you a positive message of all things using food. We hear about global food security, which is a huge issue. We hear the negative impacts of the food systems on the climate. 30% of our greenhouse gases come from the food system. Agriculture is about 11%. Sometimes that's confusing, but the whole food system, about 30%. But I'm convinced food has power, and I'm going to share that with you. First, a little bit more about me. One cow dairy farm. You missed that in the bio. I grew up, that's not me back when I was a little kid, but you can still milk a cow years later, and I'm on vacation in Costa Rica milking a cow, and a tour guide was just blown away. I also got excited about their anaerobic digester up in the corner, so one of the few tourists that got excited about the manure and could milk a cow. I'm a parent. Anybody who's a parent and not concerned about climate change, talk to me. And by the way, there's 2 daughters and a son-in-law. Where do you think they went to school and graduated from? Cornell. Where else? ILR, natural resources. Lots of leadership roles. I play all the cards. I was in this organization during the Vietnam War, United States Marine Corps. That helps a lot in front of a conservative audience. In fact, I was warned multiple times in front of an audience once about the audience. Brought that up and they applauded. I knew they weren't going to throw any chairs at me. And I like to drink and eat, well, not depending on the order of the time of day, drink and eat. That's why we're here. Talk about food. I love this quote from Edward Abbey: better a cruel truth than a comfortable delusion when talking about climate change. This is going to be a highly technical version of climate change, but that orange band, it's about 8 miles high. That's where all the action is, just 8 miles high. Solar radiation comes down, hits the surface of the earth, warms it, that radiant energy goes up, is captured by greenhouse gases, and they re-radiate it back in all directions. We're putting more and more greenhouse gases in that thin layer. It's getting denser and holding more heat. You want to visualize this? Next time you're in a flight, going across country, and the pilot says, ladies and gentlemen, we're at cruising altitude. You're at the top of the layer. You're looking down through the troposphere. Or if you're a professor walking this campus before sunrise, and you look up and you see these trails, you're looking up through the troposphere. That's it. That's where 80% of the action is occurring. Most people don't realize that. How many have seen this hockey stick, CO2 increasing from the year 1000 to current times, and about the Industrial Revolution? It goes up exponentially because we really started to burn fossil fuels. We're 50% higher than we should be. August of last year, last year 417, this year 420 parts per million. That's about typical, 3 parts per million increase per year. How many have seen this version of that graph? That's me. Another way to think of the atmosphere is a bathtub. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, the drain, natural processes were capturing greenhouse gases. The faucet was turned on just at the right amount so they're in balance. Not anymore. We've turned the faucet up. We're putting more greenhouse gases into the bathtub, in the atmosphere, faster and faster. The drain can't pull them away quick enough. So the goal now is to stabilize climate change. We're not going to turn it back. CO2 is going to be in the atmosphere up to 1,000 years. The dark line is where it used to be. The red line is where we are now. The goal is not to fill up the bathtub any more than we possibly can and stabilize the situation. The UN report in March. Humans are unequivocally the cause of global warming. We're going to pass 1.5 C, which was the big sort of limit we wanted to not exceed, but that's going to happen. Everything's escalating. Some of the changes are irreversible and compounding and cascading risk in the future, more difficult to manage. So think of a roller coaster. Right now we're going down on the roller coaster, but we're going to go back up. The whole point. And the UN Secretary General, climate change, climate time bomb is ticking. Our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once. We're in trouble. It's tough, especially on younger people. This global survey of those between the ages of 16 and 25, 75% describe their future as frightening. Hesitant to have children, eco-anxiety. Anybody feeling a little anxious about the world, climate? And I ask everybody how you're doing. I heard a webinar by the author, senior author of this paper, and she said, this is a good thing. Like, what? You pointed out that they're concerned. Young people understand what's going on. They're worried. And I started adding this slide, dealing with eco-anxiety. Your feelings are justified. One way to help is connect with nature. That's what I do. I take a walk out the back of my house down into the woods, meditate. I do the following one because that's my job. I doom scroll. But don't do that. Join others, work together. The antidote to despair is action. Careful of burnout, choose your battles, and if you need help, seek it. Food. How many of you eat? Come on. We all eat. We have to. So why use food to tell this story? When you're talking about climate change, it has to be relevant. I can't find anything more relevant than food. It's part of our cultures. Mom's apple pie, family traditions. Anybody get emotional over food? Oh, come on. Let's get a little more interactive here. I mean, sometimes there was a mole sauce I had recently. I almost cried. It was so good. Don't you have those kind of, just me? We won't go to gin and tonic. That's another topic. It's enjoyable. It's a social lubricant. Those are alcoholic beverages. It helps us socialize. Easy to talk about, unlimited stories, but this story is for the rich world, especially the US. We cause the mess. We have capacity to make a difference. Where does food come from? It is amazing how much people don't know about where their food comes from. Upper left, farmer's market. Upper right, the woman pollinating vanilla flowers one at a time in Madagascar. Every blossom needs to be pollinated by hand. The farmer in North Carolina, dairy farmer. The gentleman, big smile and hat, he's an Australian. Producing grass-fed beef for the US. By the way, we import most of our grass-fed beef. Lower left, one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, fishing the Bering Sea. Lower right, a family in Western Africa growing cacao for our chocolate, making $4 a day. This is where it comes from. In the US, here's some numbers that most people can't grasp. 1.3% of the employed population are ranchers or farmers. That's 1 in 75. 98% of our farms are family-operated farms. Few feed many. This is where it gets interesting. First, some coffee. I think everybody knows that plants need carbon dioxide, water, temperature, soil, and sunlight. But because of climate change, everything is changing except sunlight. And I'm just going to walk through this with some examples. Whoop. Rising CO2 has some really, I hate this word, interesting effects. It could also be referred to as scary, so on and so forth, but I'll stick with interesting. So increased CO2 actually benefits about 95% of our crops. Higher yields, bigger plants, etc. But the consensus is that's very nice. And you hear the deniers say that, oh, increasing CO2, climate change, that's great for crops. The consensus is thanks very much, but that's going to be offset by more extremes in weather. In time, weeds will be harder to control with herbicides. But the big one is the bottom one. For human nutrition, less protein, vitamins, and minerals in many of our staple crops, affecting tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world. In rice, B vitamins are predicted to decline about 30%. In vegetables, this is good news. Fructose, glucose, soluble sugar, antioxidant capacity, etc., flavonoids, ascorbic acid, actually are going to increase. And since one of my daughters makes me eat kale, maybe someday it'll taste good. So lots of changes. Changes in water. The entire global water system is changing. Where precipitation falls, how it falls, when it falls, and what form it falls is changing. I think we've all witnessed the new whiplash, droughts, and then too much water. For example, California in a multi-decade drought, and then hit this over the last several months with enormous amounts of precipitation. The Tulare Basin, one of the more productive regions in California, I think 275 square miles are now underwater. It's an old lake bed, filled back up. Italy, 2-year drought this spring, massive rainfall inundated about 5,000 farms. And yeah, ice melts. So the U.S. imports about $5 billion worth of agricultural produce from Peru and Chile every year. A lot of that is dependent on meltwaters from the glaciers, the ice cap. That ice cap will be gone in about 15 years. We're gonna have to find someplace else to get blueberries in winter. Why am I telling you all this? These are stories to share with others. Not to share, not to scare them, but hey, you like blueberries? Let me tell you a story. Where it falls, this is the most current depiction of the U.S. drought monitor. You can see the darker the color, the more intense the drought. So Texas and the region near Texas, still in what's called a exceptional drought. This is the high temperatures and droughts having a rough time on cattle production. Rangelands drying up, high temperatures affect the cattle. And if you look at the depiction on the right, and if you just look at the northeast US, you'll see it is blue rather. That means over time, we're gonna get more and more precipitation. In general, wet areas of the world will get wetter, dry areas drier. This might just become, the agricultural hub of the US, given we'll have water. Even hail is changing. Hail starts with a little crystal. The turbulence throws that up into the colder air and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. With more turbulence, more energy in the atmosphere, hail is predicted to get larger in some places of the US. Temperature? Anybody experienced sort of the warming conditions? It's not simple though. Winters are warming twice as fast as summers in the US. And the big deal there is fruit trees, almost all fruit trees and nut trees need a winter dormant state induced by cold temperatures. If they don't have that, they don't produce. In 2017, anybody from Georgia? Okay. I'm from Wisconsin, originally. In 2017, Georgia peak production was about 5% of normal because the previous winter was too warm. The trees did not go into dormancy. They didn't bear fruit. This year, the same situation, combination of warm winters, but also a surprise false spring, which meant it got warm, the trees blossomed, cold came through, wiped out the blossoms. We had that right here in New York this year. More heat waves. Anybody depressed? Go ahead. Just say, nod your head. I want to know if I'm doing my job. Okay. What if I had this hand operating? It's so different. Hang on. News about wheat in the U.S., production in the U.S. In the past, it was predicted about every 100 years there'd be severe high temperatures and it would drastically affect wheat crops in the central U.S. Now it's every 6 years. Heat waves. And it's also getting harder to get food to the table. In the middle, that's the Mississippi last year. It's hard to imagine a barge floating down that river. There was a drought. This spring it flooded. There's not enough water. They have to dig deeper, etc. Makes it much more expensive to transport because they may have to ship by truck versus barge. And when there's too much water, the barges can't get under the bridges. On the right, I wrote an op-ed in 21 about the Suez Canal incident, which cost billions of dollars a day because it was blocked by a ship, nothing to do with climate change. But right now, the Panama Canal is under serious threat from a drought. There's about 200 ships waiting to get in and cross through the Panama Canal. There's not enough water in the canal. On the left, maybe we can think of this positive news, but that's the ice cap, in the Arctic. In September, That's when the ice is retreated as much as it typically does. It should be where that yellow line is. But instead, it's retreating a little more every year, which actually means you can move ships through there much faster. In fact, you can move produce from Northern Asia to Northern Europe about 40% faster. Consider that a positive. Now, the good stuff. Everything depicted here has a story. And I'll walk through that. Social lubricants. What's the main ingredient in all of these products? Water. Not always available. Or the quality changes. Wine will be affected because wine grapes are affected by high temperatures. More sugar, more acidic, affects the flavor and aroma of the wine. But I want to talk about this thing. Anybody know what this is? Called a Bloody Mary with a meal. This was put together. We're actually on the very early stages of a documentary film. So a chef came up and filmed the making of a Bloody Mary, and we had a conversation of what's going on. I mean, there's a what do they call the little hamburgers? Slider. It's venison and lamb. On top of the bun is okra, breaded in some miraculous thing. There's an egg. There's all kinds of stuff in here. And these are the things that are changing in the Bloody Mary. Celery, vitamin C is going to increase. Peppers are going to get hotter. Eggs, if produced out of doors, have thinner shells because of the high temperatures. Vodka, dependent on grains, but also this vodka dependent on peaches, and he was from Georgia. He wasn't aware of what happened to the peach crop, etc. Garlic, the story is you feed it to cattle, they produce less methane. Okra, now grown in Wisconsin, no longer a southern crop. Salads, all kinds of things. Anybody want to explain what he's doing with lettuce on his head? I show this and no one ever has an answer. Kids. Anyway. Avocado production is going to decline in California. Tomatoes sweeter, onions more pungent. Main courses, there's a story everywhere here. Seafood. Well, in the future, we're probably going to have to enjoy octopus and squid more because they love warm waters. Some of our main seafood today have trouble in the hot, warmer waters. Chicken, well, probably okay. Most of it's produced indoors where they can control conditions. Beef, I mentioned, grazing lands in trouble. High temperatures, even the fires out west did direct harm with cattle that were grazing, etc. A lot of stories here to tell. Upper right are chips, as in fish and chips. A couple years ago, the English had to get used to shorter chips because of a long-term drought and high temperatures. The potatoes were smaller. I think we can all adjust to that. Spices and herbs come mainly from India and Asia. Monsoon is changing, temperatures increasing, changing the flavors. I mentioned rice, B vitamins are declining, and most of your bread products are also changing one way or another with the various ingredients within. I don't want to talk about coffee. Excuse me. But it's changing too. Cacao in Western Africa under more stress, etc. So the point being, I think you got it. Everything on the menu is changing. So let's turn that around. Well, let's squeeze in a little bit of humor. Imagine a world without ice cream. There'd be darkness and chaos. Melting glaciers are bad enough, but the loss of coffee is downright terrifying. How many of you drink coffee? There. I got some reactions. So we did a survey in the US, a national survey in 2022 to see if people cared about their food. And surprisingly, one of the questions, are you very or fairly concerned about food choices, the effect of climate change? The blue represents Democrats, the red, Republicans. It actually crossed the political divide. Everybody eats. Is there a window here? Are you willing to pay more for crops, food grown with climate-friendly practices. Same results, more or less. Both parties. And interested in learning more. Both parties. I don't know of any other topic where this even starts to align like this. Then asked, is climate change a crisis? 60% Democrats said yes, 20% of the Republicans said no. But when it comes to food, I think we have their attention. And across all parties, we talk about food often. About 3/4 of us just, when my daughters are home, it seems like that's all they talk about. What's the next meal going to be? Because we love to eat. But we don't talk about climate change very much in general. About 35% of us occasionally talk about it. What about combining these conversations? The title of this talk uses the word confront, and I love that word because the synonyms are challenge, tackle, threaten, meet head on, face up to, defy. Pick one. Or we could bury our heads in the sand. What's being done? A lot. Farmers worldwide are adopting something called climate smart farming. And I gave a talk to a group of farmers about this. And one senior farmer came up and said, Mike, that's really nice, but it's really common sense farming. That's what we ought to be doing. Focus on soil health. What do you do with too much water, not enough water? Diversify where you can. So have multiple crops in case you lose a few, you still have an income, and adapt. The food businesses, if they want to stay in business, have to make changes. They're looking at their supply chains. Where are they getting their raw product? Will they get it in the future? Are they working? They're starting to work directly with the farmers to maintain that raw product. They're even considering alternative ingredients and trying to reduce their impact on the climate. And finally, science. To me, this is an incredible opportunity to convey the power, the value of science through food. Resistant varieties, including those genetically engineered. More work on soil health. I think you're all aware we have an incredible soil health program here. Modeling, et cetera. Pest management. All these things are changing. Research is there to help. What can we all do? I'm going to start with, no one is too small to make a difference. Everybody know Greta? How much does she weigh? Sorry, I'm asking all the questions, but any guesses?
75.
105. She weighs 105 pounds. The point is, as she said, no one's too small to make a difference. So let's start with talking about it. Talk about climate change is one of the most important first steps you can have. Get fully informed of what's going on so you can make informed decisions. Focus on what matters. Bill McKibben says this, because we can do a lot of things, a lot of them don't matter anymore. You got to think big, wherever possible. Find out what you're best at, get involved, and peer pressure works if you want to change behavior. Be the first. Where you live, in the classroom, be a model. And others will go, maybe I should be doing that. Food, common ground. So what if consumers and chefs, restaurateurs, people in the food industry, the food media, producers, farmers, ranchers, came together in one voice and told this story? We don't see any villains in this story. We all eat, we depend on each other. Let's join forces and tell this story. Can we create a great awakening using food? And the great awakening is creating a much deeper state of awareness and need for action on climate change using food. We need to act quickly and at scale. We all eat every day. And power is a capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others for the course of events. Great paper by Otto et al. In 2020, basically offering several ways to stabilize the climate, including incentivize a massive shift away from fossil fuels. Hey, if you like scotch, we got to reduce our emissions. Scotch is being affected by our emissions of fossil fuels. Help people realize the growing risk, use food. Create a grassroot movement. We all eat. Change lifestyles, such as diets, and educate others in new and improved ways. They feel adopting these approaches can make a big difference in stabilizing the climate. So, as was mentioned already, we've written a book, Our Changing Menu. Basically, the core of the book is a menu, a lot of what I presented, but there's also a lot of solutions. There's also a website based on the book. It has two databases. One is on food ingredients and how they're changing, and one is on plant-based products and how they're changing, like perfumes, cosmetics, pet food, pharmaceuticals, medicinal herbs. Anything plant-based is changing. And now we're on to something else, another thing. How about sitting around a table, having a meal, and talk about what's happening on your plate because of climate change? It's a good way to talk about climate change over food. I hope this rice doesn't change flavor. Well, what can we do about it? Find a solution. The background for this is a book in the website. And we also, my colleague Danielle Eisman has created a storytelling cookbook. So you want to tell a story about what's happening to the food. And this can be done, and there's a lot of interest from people doing it at homes, at offices, schools, restaurants, etc. And we're currently teaching a Learning Where You Live course with the title of Using the Power of Food to Confront Climate Change. And part of that will be a meal next Monday, but we've also gone through kind of like a mini lecture like I've given you over the last, when the semester started. But the students will have an opportunity to tell their story about food using what they're passionate about: art, poetry, music, videos, games, photography, etc. Let them tap their own energy to tell this story. And I paraphrased their comments in the journal to kind of share with you that seems to be they're starting to understand the value of food. Someone is more willing to talk about climate change in the context of food. Someone else, this is really a great way to tell this story. Someone's talking about it's interconnected. The food system is global, so is climate change. And instead of hearing a lot of fear in the press, scary stories, and maybe scientific jargon, I like the way, these are my words, but you can change that into a digestible story using food. Conversations over a meal could really make a difference. And the power of a story comes through delivery plus content. So that's the part of the storytelling effort we're focused on. So meals like this, more people become informed about climate change. They're talking about climate change. They're empowered and better able to cope. And can we convene these meals? Everybody at the meal goes and convenes another meal. They convene another meal. And basically start a wildfire, a good one, and a way of getting the message out, and it's time to act to save your favorites. And again, as the UN Secretary General says, our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once. Maybe food can do it. With that, thank you.
Okay, we got time for some questions.
I asked a bunch of questions already. Now it's your turn.
Yeah.
You used the phrase villain earlier in your presentation. A lot of the data just across the different fields of climate change point to these big industries as the primary causes. How do you envision food as a connective tool with the public and the people? How does that intersect with the emissions of big industry?
Well, my guess is the CEO of those industries eats. That's one. There's also, I've had interest from, let me try it. It's a media outlet. I don't want to give the secret away, but I think they would love to be able to, they have dining facilities around the world. They're that big. Let's do it in our dining facilities. So it's just another, I mean, hey, so you're making $5 million a year. What's your favorite beverage? Let me tell you about it. You know, let's, given everything else is screwing up, let's try food. I mean, sorry. Maybe that's the way we can do it. It crosses religion, it crosses political divide, etc. The one thing we didn't do in our survey was income. It would have been interesting to see how, you know, those with less money and those with more money reacted to the whole story about food.
Hello, thank you again for coming to speak with us today. I'm interested in the separation of what is considered a family-owned farm. I know, I can't remember the exact statistic, but a significant amount of farms are considered family-owned. Is there a distinction between a corporate family-owned farm that's technically still private, but very, very large that might be considered industrial, and the corporate owned?
But the designation of family is sisters, brothers, mom, kids. You know, it's that, it has to be literally a member of your immediate family is involved with somebody else, whether that's the main person or not. So that's the designation.
But there's no like scale consideration in terms of like the actual size of the home.
I wish I'd have put up that depiction. Yes, there is. There's data from USDA. So of 2.2% of our US farms are non-family. They produce, non-family operated, they produce about 17% of our food. The balance comes from large family farms, small family farms, medium-sized family farms. Is that?
Thanks for a very wonderful presentation. So food, I think of as a very positive, gives you good feelings, right?
Right.
Climate change, not so positive, negative. I remember once working with a winery in South Africa that realized very quickly that people don't want to associate bad things when they're having a good time.
Right.
So if you have a winery that's produced from a poor community, people don't want to be reminded of the bad stuff. They want good thoughts and positive things associating their food. Do you see any challenge with bringing climate change to the conversation on food, bringing that on the table?
Actually, in our book, we celebrate them. It's a celebration of food. I'm not giving up cheese. I don't care. I don't care what happens to the planet. I'm not giving up cheese. You know, that they're just amazing. Oh yeah, I mean, in fact, sort of the beginning of each course, you know, salads, main courses, we talk about, oh, the history of wine. You know, 10,000 years ago they found it, and the chocolates in South America, et cetera. You know, food is wonderful, and that's the sort of the starting point. So yes, I mean, absolutely celebrate food, enjoy it. But by the way, and that's how the approach is. It isn't, oh my God, you're going to lose your chocolate. It's, excuse me, I got something to tell you about it. And then hopefully, I mean, the big question to these climate change meals is, so what? Will behavior change? So there's a research component there that we need to fill in, because that's what we ultimately want.
Thanks, Mike, for your excellent presentation. I just wondered, most of the questions you asked and answered up here focus on adaptation to climate change. And I'm just wondering, many of those adaptations are really pretty marginal. If you think about, you know, changing the variety of a particular food item like coffee or lettuce or whatever it might be that we eat, you know, we're still eating coffee, we're still drinking coffee and eating lettuce and so on and so forth. I'm just wondering if that, I absolutely buy your argument that food can be a way of sending these messages, but I'm wondering if it really crystallizes the urgency of the problem. So then do we think about, for example, meat eating? We know that enteric fermentation is really a major source of emissions. Should we focus on converting people to become vegetarians or not eating beef or so forth? I'm just wondering about this issue of sort of the urgency of the problem versus the marginal changes that we often are making. Thanks.
Thank you for the superb question. I can only say so much. You brought around a really important point, and I missed it when I showed mains. When I first wrote the chapter on meat consumption, sent it out to reviewers that said, stop eating red meat. The reviewer said, great, you lost 90% of the US population. And I'd be a hypocrite if I told everybody to stop eating red meat. So the approach now is treat it as a delicacy, not a staple, like the rest of the world, in a sense. But the message here is, and you're right, what I presented is marginal, and also trying not to scare everybody to inaction. Just, well, I can't do anything. It's a careful balance in telling this story. But we're using food to bring about those big changes. It's not just in what we eat. Simply talking about it is a huge step forward, but use food if you can, if you will. Look at your retirement portfolio. How much money is going to fossil fuels? The big issues, get involved, vote, become an activist. That's the final message in the book. But the point is using food to kind of give you that nudge to get out there. Like I think I might have said, we all need to strive to save our favorite food. And by the way, save the planet. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk.
I get paid big bucks to do this, so it's okay.
I know you touched on this a little bit with the quote from Greta Thunberg, but what would you say to someone who is saying that changing my diet will make a difference, too small of an impact, or it's too late, something like that?
I hate that question. Every tiny increment of less warming is important. So that's one thing. And that drives me. People ask, well, do you have hope? I wouldn't be here. I know the situation, it is bad, but it doesn't have to be as bad as the trajectory we're on if we really do what we need to do. And there's a ton of things we can do. I've just articulated a few, but did I answer your question? I'm sorry if I go ahead, try again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I don't hate the hope question. That's the one that should be asked. Are they graded on how many questions they have?
No.
One more, please.
Could you comment on how you can take this conversation, how things are different in the global South? This seems to be very much, global North conversation, but there's farmers and food, and the relationship to food is a little bit different. How would you approach this subject and topic in the global South, in developing countries, for example?
Well, as I qualified, the story is meant for the rich world,
yes.
Less so for other regions of the world. Let me do this. I'm part of something called the Global Social Gastronomy Movement. And they're using the power of food globally to bring about social change. So it's different. I mean, they're trying to improve the diets of prisoners in Brazil and things like that. So I think I'm struggling to make the connection to someone who's hardly got enough food to eat, and I'm going to be an arrogant person and come and say, oh, you ought to stop doing this or that. That's why we focus on the rich world, because we can do something.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
I've got one book for sale. Highest bidder. It's a very easy, I'm not selling a book, but it's a very easy read, packed with information on food, if you're interested.
One question on the chat.
Oh,
you mind?
no, not at all.
Yeah. Okay. Can you give us a question on it?
I'll read it off. Many
You have
companies.
to get it right close to you.
Okay. Yep. So many companies in agricultural biotechnology promote visions of the future that negate the necessity of radical political change. What should citizens do to resist the structural market forces contributing to fossil fuel use, such as corporate consolidation?
I think. That's a loaded question with lots of pieces. I mean, yes, there are major corporations that have a huge influence on agriculture. I think in part that's political. There's some political agendas. That's a force that's hard to be reckoned with, but I certainly think it should be acknowledged and more people know about it, that some major companies really have influence on our food system. And I'm sorry, the other part of that was biotech, visions of the future. Oh, we need everything. So we need both the biotech companies developing new climate change resistant varieties. We also need political action. We can play a role in both of those. Hope I answered your question.